I don't have a hard stop, but it's somewhere in the 90-minute range would be good.
90 minutes sounds fantastic. And look like that, Dr. Fuller, we're live.
Oh, good morning, all.
What is in your Horace Group mug this morning?
I'm drinking water domesticated on tap. So, that's how I roll.
That's how you roll.
You got to keep this. Got to keep the moneymaker hydrated, brother.
A lot of people don't know that you're coffee and caffeine free kind of guy, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I'll drink caffeine, but it's funny because apparently I'm one of those people that caffeine doesn't do a lot to keep awake and tends to make fall asleep. And I didn't even think that was a thing. I thought, okay, that's just in my head. But apparently, in conversations with a couple of MDs, it does happen occasionally. And
only to the neurodivergent. So there's that.
Apparently, I will say this: if I jack myself up on 2 or 3 cans of soda, then I'm bouncing off the walls. But if I'm driving and I drink one, it tends to make me drowsy.
Wow, that's interesting. I think my youngest son says that. I don't know. That's interesting.
And I'm in good company, sir.
Yes, you are. Let's see here. He should be coming over to watch the dogs here in the studio. Behind me are 2 amazing Labradors. Let's see.
Are they your labs or?
No, I'm in the guest house, which is also my daughter's.
That's right. She moved out there now, didn't she?
Mm-hmm. Bruce is on from Michigan. He is coin number 481. Our good friend Alan Kelly is coin number 1571 from Virginia, occupied at that. Thank you, folks, for joining us. Thank you to the 7 folks watching us live. And Dr. Fuller, what is all these numbers people keep talking about?
Well, that would be the coin. The American Warrior Society coined member. For Will Parker example is 800. I'm a 1620 member, but it gives you access. And it's a symbol, right? It's a symbol of membership.
Correct.
All like that. It's better than, the yellow expendables tag or deplorables tag most of us will have to wear at some point. It's a little bit nicer.
Yeah. I wonder what kind of badge will make us wear.
It does give one pause, doesn't it?
Yeah. Like that meme I sent you yesterday, my bigot merit badges that the left keeps giving.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I don't feel like I'm radicalizing in my attitudes, but I keep being told I am. So,
yeah, definitely not, man. I thought I was going with the flow and being open and accepting and loving and doing all the things that Christ commands us to do. And it's like, no,
I'm judging you on the content of your character. Turns out that regardless of what color skin you have, you can still be an asshole.
You can still be deplorable.
I'm having a patch made for my motorcycle vest that says I used to be expendable. Now I'm deplorable.
I love that. Man, we got a lot of folks jumping on. Ted Leonard is on. Will Rhodes is on from Missouri. John Shriver out there in Yukon, Oklahoma. A lot of fantastic coin members. My dear brothers, hope all are well. Steve is on. Coin number 2404 from Maine. Check us out on YouTube if you want to kick back, drink a coffee, and watch us on the old YouTubes there. Check us out online. Dr. Fuller and I have a really interesting show. We were kind of going back and forth. Of course, Will Wood is on vacation with his family. Will, I hope you're having a fantastic time down there. He is actually out of the country. I hope you're having a wonderful, amazing trip with your family.
Hope you're coming back.
Yeah. Dr. Fuller's like, every time I try to get out, they pull me back in, right? But Dr. Fuller
and Will keep taking these vacations overseas, and I wonder at what point vacation stops and reconnaissance starts.
Well, it's an ongoing effort, my friend. Dr. Fuller should be no surprise to anybody watching us live. Dr. Fuller is a retired FBI agent. He has a doctorate in education and policy studies.
Educational leadership and policy studies, yes, sir.
I knew I'd get it eventually. Master's degree in interdisciplinary studies. What's your bachelor's in?
I have a Bachelor's of Science in criminal justice. Criminal justice? Criminology. Pardon me, criminology, with an emphasis in law enforcement and a minor in military science and English.
Jeez, a man of many letters. Let's just leave it at that.
I had nothing else better to do with my time. That's really what it boiled down to.
Yeah,
I'll keep girls at college.
Among that beautiful resume, Dr. Fuller also was an Army Infantry officer and later an EOD officer. He was an instructor at the FBI's Fable Firearms Training Unit and also the author of No Safe Alternatives, Improving How We Teach Cops to Kill. I've got links to all this, or you can just go to Amazon or wherever you pick up your favorite books, and you'll find these amazing books. Also, the author of Painting Over Rust. Stories from a 20-year odyssey in the FBI. But if you don't want to get into those intellectual tomes, you can always increase your testosterone, ladies and gentlemen, by reading on violence and varietals, Rich Brown's amazing memoir. Highly recommend this book, guys, if you have.
I do too. I mean, honestly, Rich, knowing you helped a lot, because when I read it, of course, I heard it being read in my head in your voice. But it gives, not only does it give some good context on who you are and how you came to be who you are today, but it also gives you some great looks, some ground level looks at Okinawa as a Marine, and the PI as a Marine. You know what it's like to be a bouncer. I mean, we have all run into bouncers, we've all dealt with bouncers, but what is that job really like? And you know, what's it like to be in a prison? You know, and deal with prisoners. So you know, it was informative as well as entertaining. And
well, I hope
say that without any you know, any ulterior motives. It really was an entertaining book. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, my dear. I enjoyed yours as well. You know who I'm very shocked every time I hear we had some folks that they're friends of family friends, and they came by the farm. Hey, we're in Tennessee. You know, you mind if we swing by? We'd love to have lunch with you. I'm like, absolutely. And I didn't know it, but the gentleman's wife read it, and she's like in her probably late 60s. And I had no idea. And she's like, I really enjoyed your book. You know, I had to wince at a few parts in there. And I've heard that a lot from the females that have read the book. It's not really designed for them because there's a lot of spicy things in the book, but it's
a book by an adult for adults, right?
Yes.
It's not like you're over there passing out at the 7th grade book fairs.
Correct. Yeah. The language is crude and abrupt, just like I was in my 20s. But so, yeah, and I'm always surprised when there's a lady that has a PhD in literature, and she wrote a lengthy review on it online. So thank you, ma'am. I really appreciate that. So let's talk about today's show real quick. Please like and hit that share button, because like I said, Dr. Fuller and I was kind of like, well, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to talk about? And he had some ideas, which were strangely enough, we had just covered, Justin Carroll and I, former MARSOC operator and OGA contractor. We did a great show on non-permissive environments. So I said, why don't we just kind of recap the madness that has happened in the last 4 years? Because I think things are happening so fast and becoming normalized so quickly, and the media's attention span is that of a adolescent squirrel, and immediately they move and fixate on something else, or if there's no money or no for the clicks, they move on down the road, and it's like, wait a minute, this thing is huge, man. The ripple implications geopolitically are enormous, and you're just moving on from it. So,
yeah, and I think you really hit the nail on the head there with your comment that it's become normalized so quickly. I remember a few years ago we were on this show talking about, well, I don't see a civil war on the horizon. I've modified that position a little bit. I certainly hope we're not in that point, and I don't think we're going to see a 1860s revisit. But something like Argentina, where the things really come off the rails, all of a sudden that becomes at least a possibility on the horizon because of the behaviors that are now normalized. Right? It's so many things that were unthinkable 5 years ago are perfectly acceptable now.
Exactly. They barely, are a blip on the radar these days. So with that being said, without much further ado, let's jump into it. So this is just kind of a recap on some of the madness. I'm going to ask for Dr. Fuller's opinion, because one of the things that we often don't forget is that some of these things, they're just not stovepipe. They have intersection points, whether they're now, 6 months from now, or in the future, whether that's geopolitically, economically, et cetera, culturally. I think it's important. Let's start with COVID, Dr. Fuller. A pandemic response. Was it fumbled? Could they have done it better? Were there lies? Yes. With all that being said, as you look back on that, it's 4 years ago. Hard to believe.
Wow.
What are your thoughts on this thing?
Well, at the risk of avoiding being in an echo chamber where we all kind of have the same opinions and we bounce it back and forth, I think it's important to note right off the front that COVID was a thing, right? It really was a disease, and it really did kill people. So there's really no sense in saying it wasn't, or debating that particular issue. Where I saw problems personally was, and this was sort of a harbinger, I think, of things to come, is I couldn't get solid data.
Correct.
And I kind of default not to conspiracy in my thinking. I'm more prone to defaulting to the idea that it's just incompetence, right? It's just well-meaning people, perhaps, that are just not good at what they're doing, or they don't know what they're doing, or they're just screwing up. All right. And that probably comes from 32 years of working for the federal government. So, COVID was new, right? It was a new thing. And I think there were honestly people in there trying to stop the death, right? But I don't think we were getting a good picture of it. And I think the real problem then is it evolved into a political football. And suddenly we had politicians making medical decisions and giving medical advice on both sides of the aisle. And I think that was just a really, really bad thing. And then it didn't help when occasionally people took their agendas, attached them to COVID, and then molded the truth to fit their perspective or their desired outcome. And then it feeds into the ideas that, we've already got people that don't trust the government, right? Let's face it, ever since Watergate, the media has been harping on the idea that the government's not trustworthy. And, you can say they are, you can say they aren't. But now people are more prone to believe that the government's lying to them. The government is telling them, is trying to mold their opinions, is it's trying to push them into something.
Right.
And so when somebody comes out now and has a bully pulpit on the internet and says the government is doing X, the government is doing Y, whatever that might be, you're going to have a very polarizing effect. And then you throw in the people that actually are lying and telling stories or molding the truth. And you have politicians that have agendas that are jumping in on it. And all of a sudden, from where I sat, it was very hard to get the truth. It was very hard to say, okay, what is actually going on here? Because when I started looking for actual numbers, what I found was it differed from state to state, not based on actual numbers of people who were passing away, but based on definition. A COVID death, find me a definition of COVID death that is accepted in all 50 states. I couldn't do it. And I'm fortunate enough to have in my circle of friends, various MDs around the country, and I would ask them, and they would point to different sites, and I would go to them, of course, because I'm trying to figure out, okay, how many people did die in 2020 from COVID? And what I was finding was New York was modifying their numbers, right? They reported X number of numbers.
But why were they doing that, Dr. Fuller?
Well, the $1,000 question, right? I mean, first of all, the first thing that I think of is money.
Exactly. Right? They got money per COVID death. So if you had, it's like George Floyd, if you had COVID in your system,
you're a COVID death.
Exactly. So people die car crash. Well, he had COVID, so I can get money. And that's not conspiracy, man. The lady across the street from me right now, she's a nurse at the time. And matter of fact, she works in the administration where they classify these kind of things. And she was saying that's exactly what they were doing.
Yeah. And I would go to federal sites, right? And try to figure out, okay, the federal government is collating this information and publishing it. Wasn't easy to find. I mean, it was just simply was not. You would think that something like COVID, there would be right there on the front page of the website. Bang! This is how many people passed last month, or 2 months ago. However long it takes them to collate the data. With a tag that says, "Look, this is initial data. We still need do this and that." Some sort of idea that this is the best we can do right now. But no, I couldn't find it, and I would dig and I would dig, and then you'd go to another state. Take New York, says, okay, if you had COVID in your system and you got hit by a bus, COVID death. Whereas other states would say, no, look, if you had COVID and you died of respiratory failure, maybe we're thinking that's a COVID death. So it was a much more stringent set of circumstances elsewhere. And it was 2 years before we really figured out most of the COVID deaths were coming from people with extensive comorbidities, right?
Correct.
Who were already aged. Italy got hammered, right? Oh my God, Italy was just getting destroyed. But what we didn't see for a long time was the fact that, Italy had a very aged population, and it was hammering right through their aged population. Well, that's less surprising. What really shocked me then was finding that this was the case, and we were instituting the same levels of precautions for 6-year-olds that we were for 65-year-old 350-pound diabetics with heart conditions.
Exactly.
And that was ridiculous. And then, of course, that translated into hammering the economy because you've got people in charge that are at best panicking,
Mhm.
That's the best that can be said of them. They were trying to do the right thing in a panic, and they just blah and wrecked the economy in the process.
Yeah.
At worst, you could start to go back to what we were talking about earlier and say they had an agenda. You know, of course, a lot of the audience that we talk to here, we're going to default to, I don't know, something's up there. We're very suspicious.
Never let a good crisis go to waste, right?
Never. But that's true on both sides of the aisle. And I
Correct.
know that a lot of your audience will tend to throw it only on the left. And I get that. I understand where that's coming from. But we need to, be fair in that regard and say, look, people on the right were doing the exact same thing, just because they're all fighting for a re-election. They're all trying to polarize their base and trying to move forward. But what I find absolutely reprehensible in that is that in the process, they were letting people die. We weren't directing our limited medical capabilities to the populations most at risk.
Yeah.
And that's just reprehensible. That's inexcusable. You can't just blanket everybody and say, oh my God, we don't have enough X, whatever X is, because we're giving it to everybody. But you're also giving it to a population that's not affected by the disease.
Correct. Yeah.
Let's
unpack a couple of these things you bring up, Dr. Fuller, because they are important. For me, it's like you said, when we're shutting down parks because we're following the science as we're being told, but when you look at the fomite transmissions, i.e. outdoor transmissions, or when you're touching surfaces transmissions, it's rare. Sure. For both of those instances, whether it's fomite, i.e. you're touching an inanimate object and then you're transmitting COVID to yourself or someone else, or you're out in a park, and yet we shut those places down. We're following the science when we're masking children, and yet it's not affecting children for whatever reason. So there was so much that was wrong, and the loss of personal liberties is, again, just like we saw with the Patriot Act and some of these things that were well-intentioned. I'm hoping, those are air quotes if you're listening to the podcast, but I don't ever want us to forget this terrible thing that was done to us. There was, it was one of those things like the medicine was worse than the cure was worse than the.
Yeah, it was. And, my eldest son spent his freshman year, his kindergarten year at home, right? He had to be 6 years old and he was getting his education on a laptop. My pediatrician was telling us, look, we don't know what the long-term effects of this vaccine are on children. So I wouldn't give it to him. I'm like, well, children aren't being affected by the disease. So why would I give it to them in the first place?
Right.
Measles, mumps, and rubella, we've been doing that for 50, 60, 80 years.
And for good reason.
But we have the history. We know that, hey, when he's, 55, having gotten that vaccination 45 years ago, his arms aren't going to fall off, or, he's going to have a massive coronary and fall over dead. Well, is that true of the...
Remember the morning sickness medication? I think it was in the late 60s. It caused horrible birth defects, and we stopped that immediately. But your point about that you started that your discussion with was that words have meaning, and if every state and every municipality's got a different definition, then how can you ever aggregate the data into anything that's usable? Yeah. It's the same thing with the FBI uniform crime reporting. We like to think it's a pretty good piece of gear, and it would be if everybody kind of followed the same rules with what is and is not an aggravated assault, or what is and is not a B&E, or some of the very common definitions. We have to have one playbook,
and we don't. And here's the other thing that's really going to bite it. It won't be a problem for you and I, but 100 years from now, the data that they've got now, it's going to have petrified into a capital T truth. Right? Mm-hmm. We look at the data from the Spanish flu and we think we have the numbers. Well, after what we've just been through, did they conflate those numbers with other issues back in the teens for social reasons we're unaware of? I don't know.
Perhaps.
But 100 years from now, they'll be doing studies and making medical decisions based on what, to my mind, is horribly flawed data.
Yeah.
So, good luck to you there in the future. Exactly. All the best.
Yeah, Tony says the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth is about 6 months. Yeah, that's
these days, right?
And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Greg says, good morning. Just received your book, Rich. Thank you. Started and enjoyed it. Greg from Texas, coin number 2060. Let's see here. Alan Kelly says, finally got to finish Dr. Fuller's book. Excellent read. Thought-provoking on your training to LE and excellent points made for improving training overall. TJ says that good morning from North Carolina. This is the first time Facebook is showing me your live feed in years. I'm not surprised. Control the language, control the narrative, control the sheep. That's coming from Will Parker. Biden corruption of the laptop from hell. This is the second thing I wanted to kind of touch on briefly. We are told that there's nothing to the fact that Biden leveraged over $1 billion in aid to the Ukraine when he was vice president. Guys, this is quite some time ago. Vice president, he said, I looked at them and said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor is not fired, you're not getting the money. He got fired, and they put in place someone who was solid at the time, end quote. And when you look at Shokin, who was the prosecutor who was fired by Vice President Biden, first of all, no politician should be leveraging mine and your money. It's not their money. It's mine and your money. It's our children's future. And he, on a sworn affidavit he made in 2019 for a court in Austria, Shokin, the fired prosecutor, said, quote, the truth is that I was forced out because I was leading a wide-ranging corruption probe into Burisma Holdings, a natural gas firm active in Ukraine, and Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, was a member of the board of directors, end quote. Shokin continues stating that on several occasions, President Poroshenko asked me to have a look at the criminal case against Burisma and consider the possibility of winding down the investigative actions in respect to this company, but I refused to close the investigation. He was like a pit bull on this thing, and of course, Biden could not have that. And I'm talking about a sitting president, guys. I realize that this is not, but we have the evidence. And when the laptop first came out, of course, 50 former intelligence agents says, oh, this is classic Russian disinformation. Social media went insane. They censored everything. They shut down the New York Post's Twitter account. So this is something that's, I think once the history books write this, it'll be the largest corruption in American history. What do you think, Dr. Fuller?
Well, it may very well be. The part of it that really annoys me is you've got so many, people barking about this from so many different angles that it's not getting a good hard look in court. It really, I think at this point, if I were the investigator, I would make the case for let's indict people. Let's start putting people in grand jury. Let's move this case forward.
Correct. Let's
put them in grand jury. Let's put them under oath. Let's pull in the information and let's figure out, is this disinformation? Well, let's find out. If people talk to you, and any investigator that's watching the show will tell you, if I can get someone to talk to me, they're doomed, because what's going to happen is they're either going to tell me the truth and I'm going to go prove it, or they're going to lie to me and I'm going to go prove that.
Exactly.
Right? So if you push this investigation through social media, well, anybody can say anything, right? So if somebody's got the truth, and they're probably crowing about it, but they're being drowned out by other people that have the truth, or that have the truth and don't want it to come out, so they dilute it. So what is the truth? I don't know, but there's clearly enough smoke here to open an investigation and to run it to ground, which of course they did. And now apparently there's a new defense, which is I'm old and I can't remember things and I stumble on stairs. So ergo, I'm not responsible,
right,
from a criminal standpoint for my actions.
Yeah.
Okay, so at 85, I can commit homicides? Is that what we're saying now?
Sure.
Because I'm just old and I forgot. And you're not even going to prosecute me? I get it. If somebody's mentally incompetent, then you prosecute them and then you figure out what to do with them. Right? You know that. You've dealt with people in that world. You don't just say, well, Fred's crazy. He shot those 6 people at the Denny's, but we all know he's nuts and he's old and he's got a limp, and so let him go. That doesn't happen anywhere else except apparently inside the Beltway.
A 102-year-old man that has to remove the graffiti from his wall. They're going to fine him like $1,000 a day. He didn't put the graffiti there, of course, right. And they want him to get out there and do it. But evidently, the sitting president has fingers on the nuclear launch codes. He's too old to be held accountable for withholding classified information.
And that's just baffling to me. And look, there's a conspiracy here, which there clearly must have been. I mean, that seems obvious to me. Well, he's only one member of that conspiracy.
Yeah.
If you eventually want to get everybody together and say, okay, that guy, we're going to give him immunity for whatever reason, well, that's another animal. But you don't just go, well, it's all done in Cartman's voice in my head. Hey, you're going to go away. And he's just, it's just nuts to me. It's absolutely insane. And then for them to stand there and say, well, we're a nation of laws. Stop. We're a nation of two sets of laws. One set of laws that applies to you and I, and one set of laws that applies to the guy who says, look, if there's somebody breaking your house, go out on the front porch and blast off with your double-barrel shotgun, and this guy will scare him away. You and I go to jail for that.
That is correct.
Right? It's just gotten so bad in my head now that they're not even trying to hide it anymore.
No, it's like they had, Devin Archer. Of course, he's a convicted felon, so take his information for what it's worth. But Tony Bobolinsky, his record, business acumen is relatively unimpeachable, and he's testifying before Congress. Of course, Hunter Biden doesn't show up. He gives Congress a middle finger, and nobody seems to give a shit about that. So this is kind of ongoing. We'll see where it goes. It's one of these things. They're going to certainly slow roll it until maybe some statute of limitations continue to run out on his tax evasion charges, et cetera. But more to follow on that. Let's talk about January the 6th, Dr. Fuller.
Real quick before you jump off that.
Yes.
Hunter Biden gets a subpoena from Congress. Congress has no enforcement arm. So when they issue a subpoena, it's up to the executive branch to enforce it. So you subpoena the president's son in Congress. Who's the head of the executive branch?
Daddy.
His dad. Right? So who's shocked that nobody went out there and scooped him up and drug him back in handcuffs?
He was flying on Marine One at the same time. He was not appearing in front of Congress. I mean, that sends a terrible message.
And of course, at this point, they all seem to just be depending on the idea, well, the public's got a 30-second memory. Like you said, a deranged squirrel. They'll just let it go. And they're right. I mean, you can't fault them. They're right. We're like, oh, well,
and that's why we're doing this show. I mean, to reposition some of these things in front of you and like, hey, guys, I know things move fast these days. Any one of these things that we're going to talk about today, and we've got quite a few of them, could consume the news and would have 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And now there's such a constellation of crap. It's easy to get distracted.
Yeah, and this selective enforcement, and we're going to talk about it more coming forward in the show, is becoming endemic, and it cannot stand. It simply can't stand.
Correct.
Something is going to collapse.
That's right. And that's why we're talking about it. January the 6th, I've heard electoral justice protests. I've heard insurrection. Dr. Fuller, where do you fall down on this instance?
I fall down on just a bunch of dumbasses. I mean, come on, guys. Whether it's prosecutorially valid to go after people or not, we can debate that. But if you're at the Congress and that kind of thing's going on, and you're dumb enough to do what you did, don't be surprised if people get upset with you. Correct. The problem I have is, at the same time, Portland is burning down buildings. It's throwing Molotov cocktails at federal agents guarding a federal structure. And no one's being prosecuted. The mayor of the city of Portland is in the protest, throwing things at a federal building, not prosecuted. But you're going to chase down every single soul that was on that hill that day, and put them in jail.
What is Operation Quiet Skies or something like that the air marshal's doing, where they're still following around some of the people that flew into DC that day?
Yeah,
irrespective of where they were.
I've heard that, and I haven't obviously seen anything official because I don't see things that are official anymore. Mm-hmm. But again, it falls into that category of true or not. It sounds true enough in the current environment to make people upset.
Right.
You people aren't going to go back to, look, the government's going to obey the laws. We're not there anymore. Mm-hmm. Right? None of us sit here and go, yeah, well, that sounds bad, but that's illegal, and so the government won't do that. We've left that behind, and that is a problem. That is a real problem. It's a funny story about the January 6th. I was invited to go up there for that. Another retired FBI agent friend of mine said, hey, there's going to be a rally for President Trump on January 6th up in D.C. You want to go? And I was down here in South Carolina. And he said, so-and-so, this other guy is going to go too, who is an active agent. And I was like looking at my phone, I'm like, are you insane? What? No, I'm not going to that. And this is, of course, 2 weeks beforehand. He's like, why not? I says, because there's nothing good that comes of that. If anything goes sideways and the media finds out that you were there, it doesn't matter if you get hit in the head with a brick, right, in a riot. If the media finds out that there was a former FBI agent there, or God forbid, an active duty FBI agent there, doesn't matter what you were doing there, parking your car, walking your doggy, getting a donut, I don't care. It's going to be national news. And so I don't want to be anywhere. I'm not going to be anywhere near the state of Virginia. Apologies, Alan Kelly. Let alone up in Northern Virginia.
Yeah.
And fortunately, both of them didn't go. Things worked out. They weren't there that day.
Thank God.
Right. But of course, apparently we're hearing now that there are FBI sources there in the audience and potentially FBI agents there. None of that looks good on you.
No. And my first cousin, him and his wife, they were going to take their kids up there and, support the president's position. And at the last minute, they had to cancel their reservations at the hotel and pull back from it. And thank God they did, or they might be being hunted down like animals, like the 1,265 defendants that have been charged in 50 states. Over 700 at this point. This data, I think, is as of the end of December, but now that we move forward, it's rising. It's well over 700.
Now, you're not getting the data off of conspiracytheorist.com.
No, this is .gov website. 90% of this is not coming from Rich's brain. All this stuff is coming from, I apologize, I'm plagiarized the hell out of the internet, but most of the things that I'm presenting this morning are straight off .gov websites. So, you could say, what have we learned? I don't know, other than to be careful what political rally you choose to attend, especially with facial recognition software being what it is, man. It's easy to track your ass everywhere you go.
Well, soon enough, we'll have the 15-minute cities, and you won't have to worry about it, because if the rally's in another city, you won't be able to attend anyhow without derailing your social score and not being able to buy a Snickers bar next week. So,
a good friend's niece was killed by Capitol 50. Okay, police. Roseanne Boyland. I'm not aware of that, Tony. I did not know that. I think that was Ashley Babbitt was the female that was killed breaching the security there.
She was the one shot, right?
Yeah, and it's not that I fault that officer that shot her. I mean, you have limited when you're facing thousands of freaking people, and you and maybe two or three other officers have a duty to protect those people. I mean, what do you want him to do? I mean, it would have been nice to say pepper sprayer. I don't know what tools he had on his tool belt, but again, anyway.
Yeah, and I used to, as I used to work up on that hill, and those doors. I mean, if they decide to shut that building and close that building up, those doors are no joke. I mean, Most of those doors were built in the 1800s. They're ready to withstand a battering ram.
Yeah. So
the fact that there were so many people inside wandering around, we've all seen the videos where people are just basically on tour, right? Just
exactly.
Roll through. That tells me that maybe nobody was perceiving it as a riot until,
right. And I want to be clear before somebody starts sending me a hate email. I think Ashley Babbitt was a patriot. Don't get me wrong in that. I'm so torn. I've got a lot of cognitive dissonance, from years as inside the government, and then also understanding that as an Air Force veteran, she took an oath to support and defend the President of the United States as well as the Constitution. And, she felt like she was being compelled to do her duty, and it sadly it led to her death. So Tony says, Google her name. She was beaten to death. There's a video. I will have to definitely take a look at that. Ted says, not protesting type, but feels some shame for feeling chilled. Tony says there was an initial report that she was trampled until a video and witness came forward. Wow, I'll have to definitely dig into that one. Thank you, sir. Next thing we're going to talk about Dr. Fuller. Once again, I, as a little kid, and you may too, I remember being in school during the fall of Saigon and the teachers bringing out a TV and watching the helicopters lift off from the U.S. Embassy and shoving helicopters into the sea when the disasters fall in Vietnam. And I lived to see another one like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that really gets under my skin. That was so badly botched. So badly botched.
Which one? And, both?
Both. Well, in my mind, Afghanistan is worse because we already had the Vietnam experience to draw from.
Correct.
Right. And some of the generals involved came into the military, probably not during Vietnam, but certainly like you and I.
Correct.
Their initial instructions in the military were given to them by Vietnam veterans.
Yeah.
Right. So they had that experience to draw from. And of course, Milley came out later and said, look, my job is to do what the civilians tell me to do. I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your job is to do it professionally and to do it well, and, there's a time and a place to look at the president and say, look, we can't do that safely in the time frame you're giving us. That can't be done.
Yep.
And you need to draw that line.
And let's talk about this, because those of us that haven't worn our nation's uniform may not understand this. And every year that cohort gets smaller and smaller. Now it's less than 1%.
And better looking, I might say.
True. But let's clarify that. When you're an enlisted person, you're given an order that you feel is unethical, immoral, etc. There are avenues for you to pursue. You can request mass in the Marine Corps and the Navy. I'm sure the Army has some sort of administrative process to raise your paw and go, I'm not doing this. This is inappropriate, sir. What you're asking us to do is suicidal, homicidal, etc. As an officer, you don't have any of those venues. Those are not for you. You know what venue you do have? Resign your commission, which is basically falling on your sword. Mm-hmm. And as a career officer, as a general officer, it would be easy for you to go, you know what, I'm going to retire now with 30 years in. I'm done. Sir, you find somebody else to do this. And you have enough people that are firm in their moral conviction to go, sir, I appreciate your plan. This is not a workable solution. I'm going to go ahead and resign my commission. Thank you for allow me to serve in your administration. I'm done. Like, what are you doing? Let's talk about this.
Right. And, the PFC standing on the gate at Bagram Airport, he decides I'm not going to obey this rule and I'm going to go through this venue to protest it. It's not going to make CNN. No one's going to know. He's going to be on his merry way. He'll get cashiered or whatever they're going to do to him. And that'll be that. A 4-star general who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff says, look, I am going to resign over this, is a whole different animal. Because the day after he resigns and he's out of uniform, he's on every major media source out there saying, this is why I left, because they are screwing this up and it's going to get a bunch of people killed, which of course the administration doesn't want, because it's not like Sergeant Brown or Second Lieutenant Fuller is the one saying that. This is a man who's spent his life in uniform, who has risen to the pinnacle of his career. And he feels so strongly about how poorly this was being done that he left. Mm-hmm. So just by virtue of him threatening to resign, it's going to have an impact on policy, period. Okay. Or he could slow roll it. You know that from being a warrant officer, right? Yeah. If ever I've met an expert in slow rolling something, it's a member of the E4 mafia or a warrant officer, right? If they decide something ain't going to get done, it ain't getting done. And it's going to be legal and lawful, and you in charge have no earthly way of fixing that, in my experience. So he could have done it differently, and he didn't.
There's a great book called To the Beat of a Different Drum, or To the Beat of the Drummer. And if Michael Gentili's on this morning, he may be familiar with this. It was Mike Devers wrote the book about his time as Reagan's chief of staff. Fantastic book. Just a really poignant inside look of Reagan as a man and his inner circle.
Well, anyway, I'll link in the show notes.
Yeah, To the Beat of a Different Drummer. Fantastic little book. But one of the things he talks about is he tried to talk. He doesn't say what specific thing it was, but he said, I tried to talk the president out about it. I tried to. And finally, I started packing up my office. And he come in, he's like, Mike, what are you doing? It's like, sir, my resignation is on your desk. It's been an honor serving with you, sir. The wife and kids will be here at the West Wing to help me get this shit out from my car. And he's like, what are you doing, Mike? He's like, Mr. President, I can't do this. I can't be a part of this. And it's like, okay. And it course corrected the president to see how firmly he was taking this position. And this is the kind of spine that I don't see amongst some of the career. I've mentioned it before. A lieutenant that I worked for back in the day retired as a lieutenant colonel. He became the director of FEMA. He's a good man, Pete Gaynor. Well, he wrote an article in the Marine Corps Gazette talking about the cowardice of a post-command colonel. So if you don't know this or not, if you've had a command as a colonel, you get to be seen as, are we going to promote this guy to the general ranks? He's going to be a flag officer. He's going to be a made man. And if you don't get a command after that, you don't get a star, you're just coasting until it's over, right? You're going to get a staff job and be that. This is the time when you really need to flex those eagles and let them fly, and you know, and tell truth to power. And we don't see that, especially at the general ranks these days.
Yeah, and it in this case is very egregious because it cost a whole lot of people their lives,
Yep.
and that's why you're given those jobs, is to make those difficult decisions. I mean, how many times have you heard the phrase "the hard right over the easier wrong"?
Correct.
Right. That's the ethical standard. You make your decisions. You make the right decisions or the best decisions you can given the information you have in the moment you have it. And you don't always get to take the easy route. And the further up the chain of command you go, the more important that is. Because look, if a private E2 makes a bad decision, the level of impact, generally speaking, is fairly minor. Okay. When a 4-star general, who's the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, does, as we see, it's a little bit more impactful. And I'm not saying that it wasn't time to leave. I'm not saying that we couldn't have gotten out of there. There was a plan in place for withdrawing because they knew. I mean, I was there in 2004. I knew we were going to leave someday.
Of course.
Everybody knew we were going to leave someday. It's just that Biden wanted the political football of I got us out of Afghanistan. Well, yeah, but it's not your son that's pushing up daisies now because of that shitty decision that you made.
I come from a small town, Corryton, Tennessee, population 500. One of the 13 Americans that were killed, and 180 Afghanis killed with him at the gate. Is a young man named Knaus from Corryton, Tennessee. So it hit our community hard, where I was born and raised, and several of my friends over there knew that family really well. And for what? For nothing, because Senate Foreign Relations Committee found that as many as 9,000, let me say that again, this is Senate Foreign Relations Committee. This isn't Rich Brown or I'mRight.com. 9,000 Americans were left in Afghanistan during the Biden administration's disastrous withdrawal. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken originally claimed the number was around 100 to 150. The report goes on to say that the State Department believed that between 10,000 and 15,000 Americans were in Afghanistan as late as August the 7th. In the next 2 weeks, only 6,000 Americans were able to escape ahead of the Taliban takeover. And I submit, what have we learned from this thing?
Well, first of all, I think one of the things we should learn is stop calling it withdrawal and just call it a retreat, because it was just headlong flight. It really was. I mean, and we left so much stuff. We left all those people behind. We left so much stuff behind. And we're going to see that stuff again. I mean, the Israelis have already been on the receiving end of some of our military aid that we left in Afghanistan that somehow made it for its way from the Taliban to Hamas, some way, shape, or form. Can't imagine how that worked. These decisions have impact. And like you said, you need courageous people in the positions that say no. It's easy to say yes.
Yes.
Right? It's easy to take that easy wrong. It's more difficult to make the decision and stand behind it that is the hard right.
Yep.
And I don't know what happens to people because, Milley came up at the same time I did. Obviously did much better than I did, but nonetheless, he was...
That's debatable, by the way.
He was the recipient of the same training I was. And from day one, you were beat over the head. Look, you've got to make ethical decisions. You've got to make the best decisions, and it won't always be easy. Sometimes you'll get, your ass in a sling for the decisions you make. The worst ass chewing I ever took in my entire military career, and there were some good ones.
Their legend is up.
Was when I went into a minefield after a couple of injured Bedouins who'd set off an anti-tank mine, and I wasn't able to save the dad, but I was able to get the I don't know, she was an 8 or 10-year-old girl out of the minefield. We've talked about this before, Rich. And she unfortunately died a few days later because she was just beyond saving. But when I got back after that mission, back to the installation, the battalion commander called me in, asked me what happened, and when I told him, I was the recipient of, no joke, a solid 30-minute ass chewing. And when the 05 commander is giving the 03 commander an ass chewing like that, you kind of figure your career is over. I was eventually given the Soldier's Medal, which is the highest peacetime award for heroism that the military gives, for that same incident. So, in my response to him at the time, I eventually got pretty pissed off, and it became a rather heated in as much as it was a conversation, and I shouldn't try to portray it as a conversation, but in as much as I was able to reply, I told him at the time that, look, those are human beings. I get it.
Right.
You're looking at it as, soldiers in the military. I don't risk my life for the civilians. I said, but we're not in a war, and those were two human beings that were injured, and I was the only one in a position to do anything about it. So in my head, there was no debate. There's no, well, they're only Bedouins. No, they're humans. They're humans and they need help. So let's get them freaking help. And I said, I'd do it again tomorrow, sir. You will not do it again tomorrow.
Yeah, I will. Watch me.
I agree to disagree on that one, sir. And he eventually called me like a year and a half later when I got the award. He called me and hey, congratulations on that. I'm like, do you not remember that ass? Because I remember that ass chewing. I'm still picking the teeth out of my mouth. Yeah.
I'll never forget that ass chewing.
I'll talk about it 20 years from now on a podcast.
Yeah. Exactly. There's a guy, I think his name's Kyle Morgan. It speaks to what you said. This understanding that there's a priority of a moral hierarchy of things, and priority of life being probably the apex of these things. Is human life at risk? Yes. And then if there is, then I don't need your permission. I'm going to act, and we'll let it sort itself out. But Kyle Morgan, Delta Force operator, happened to be, he was a JSOC asset at the time, the only one from CAG. And he went into a building and rescued a bunch of hostages. You don't hear about him so much as you probably do the SAS guy, Christian Craighead, in Nairobi.
Obi-Wan Nairobi, yeah.
Yeah, Obi-Wan Nairobi. And you probably should hear more about Kyle Morgan because it's an incredibly ballsy move. And there was some MARSOC operators there. And no offense to my friend Justin Carroll, who was just on Friday, is a MARSOC operator himself. Kyle goes to him and is like, hey, man, put your shit on. Let's go. And they're like, well, we need to call back to Lejeune. Like, you don't need to call nobody. It's part of your life, brother. We got hostages to rescue. And they kitted up, went in and did their thing. But, ass chewing be damned. I don't. If you're afraid of an ass chewing, then you don't need to be in a position of leadership.
That's true.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, really.
That's very true. I mean, because you're not going to make everybody happy.
No.
If you're doing the job, you're not. What was it Patton said? If you're not pissing people off, you're not doing the job.
Leadership is not likership, man. It would be great if they would love you, but I'll take fear over love every day. Thank you, Machiavelli.
And what we're seeing in our political leaders now, and I'll put that in air quotes, is more of their priority is keeping their job, and it's not doing the right thing for the United States. They're making decisions now, at least from my perspective, because I don't right away think, okay, they're agents of foreign nations trying to actively destroy our country. I think they're just trying to build up their political parties. And in the case of one party right now, they've opened the floodgates to millions of people from other countries.
What a great segue.
Who are going to eventually vote their way, especially if they now make it legal for people who are non-citizens to vote and to hold positions of power in law enforcement. And that's not a decision that's in the best interest of the Americans and the American nation. That's a decision that's in the best interest of your political party and potentially you getting reelected. Well, that's a wrong set of priorities, folks.
100%.
You're just not doing the job you're hired to do. Your job is to do the right thing for the United States and to represent the people who sent you to hold that office. Why is this even a conversation? Did we not take basic civics at some point in our educational process? I'm beyond flummoxed by why this is happening.
You and me both. It's like that's why we're having this conversation this morning, Dr. Fuller. I have to keep telling my children, this is not normal. It's not normal. Don't let anybody tell you it is. The shit that's going on right now. And I don't want to sound like the sky's falling, but guys, at some point we need to wake up. The question is, what do we do about it? Which we'll get to perhaps at the end of the show. But the border crisis. Now, I've got 2021 until present, but in reality, it's been going on far longer than that. I don't want to paint it as anyone. President Obama was often looked at as the deporter in chief, is what some people called him, because he had no problem sending them on their way. Now, a lot of people that doesn't play well to his liberal base, perhaps, but the numbers are the numbers. And then they doubled during Trump's administration and quadrupled since then. So I'm not trying to imply some sort of exponential growth, or maybe I am, because when you look at this, Dr. Fuller, a historic high of 3.2 million encounters in fiscal year 2023.
That's not an implication, Rich. You're not implying anything. You're simply quoting numbers that are statistically available.
That's correct. Yeah, from a .gov website. And of course, in December, an absolute record 302,000 encounters, including apprehensions and immediate catch and release, with a monthly average 2013 to 2019 of 39,000 a month. That's an order of magnitude increase.
And why is that? Why are all these people suddenly going to the border? Well, I'm sure because they know they can get through now. You know, right. You didn't walk here from Venezuela when you knew that you were just going to get turned around, you're going to sneak across the border and if you got caught, you were just going to get sent home. Some people said, you know what, the cost benefit isn't there for me.
Right.
But if now, you know, look, all I have to do is get there. And once I get there, I can bring my family up there and life will be good, right? Streets are paved with gold and, you know, they're going to put me up in a 4-star hotel and they're going to give me $10,000 a month. Why would I not go? You're going to give me 5 years of my salary that I would make here if I go up there? Well, deal. You know, look, Ecuador comes out tomorrow and says, look, whatever your annual salary is, if you immigrate to Ecuador, we'll give you 5 times that. I'm on a plane, Rich.
Me and you both.
You know,
we'll split a townhouse. You take one side, I'll take the other.
I'm just gone. I mean, why would I not? Oh, if all of a sudden I could go, you know, live on Mount Olympus and, you know, sit around drinking ambrosia all day, why wouldn't I? Right. You know, I'm living in a mud hut. My kids are dying of cholera. There are no job opportunities, certainly no educational or advancement opportunities here. But if I get over the line, if I can cross the Rio Grande, all my dreams come true.
It's the land of the big PX, brother.
Yeah, it is.
It really is. So, you know, I used to work with a 501c3. I've mentioned it on here, but it's been years, so I'll revisit it briefly. I'm not going to say the name of it, and it was helping migrants that come here legally. That's the operative word. The people that are legally here as a Christian 501c3. And we would say, hey, you know, if you got somebody that has some carpentry skills looking for work, give me a call. I went over there and interviewed many right there in the church.
I like what you did by a carpenter church. Nice tie-in.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You know, those are sneaky.
And we hired some Burundians, and they worked incredibly well until one day, this guy, John is what we called him. His name was actually like literally 30 something letters long.
And not a vowel in the sentence there. Yeah.
Not a chance. So just like, I'm sorry, Richie, I can't work here anymore. I'm like, what's going on? Well, you know, Mr. Brown, they pay me more not to work. And for him, like you said, cost benefit analysis is like, why am I making, you know, whatever we were paying him? By the way, we paid him. I started them more than I did other employees because I don't want anybody coming back and saying, oh, you took advantage of these, you know, poor Burundians. No.
It's also a church organization, right? If you can give a little extra to people who clearly need it and are willing to work for it, that makes sense to me.
Amen. And but ultimately he's like, no, you know, the church gave me a car. The church is giving me clothes and a place to stay. You're paying me X and I'm getting
X plus 20% to
sit on my ass. It's like, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I'm like, okay, well, good for you, brother. I guess I don't know what to tell you. And we lost him forever, but we have a crisis, and sadly, nobody's wanting to look into it.
Yeah. And look, you are like me. Have been in third world countries, right? You've seen how people live in these other places. You understand at a visceral level why people want to immigrate here. I get that. I absolutely understand that. But we have laws. And you know, we used to be a country of laws, a nation of laws. We prided ourselves on that point. Yeah. There is a legal way to immigrate into this country, perfectly accessible to anybody, right?
Yeah.
And as we've talked about before on the show, you can go back and watch President Clinton, State of the Union speech. We need to fix immigration. We need to fix the laws. Okay. Well, then when you had the House, the Senate, and the presidency, why didn't you fix it? And then the other side of the aisle gets in charge, says the same thing. They get, you know, all of the legislative branch and the executive branch, and they don't fix it. And then it goes back and forth and back and forth. That tells me that you're not interested in fixing it. You're interested in keeping it alive as a political football.
Yeah. Well, the administration of the 45th president did, in fact, put a lot of things in place rather immediately and campaigned on that in 2016. And then, of course, we saw day one of the current administration. 12 of the 17 executive orders that he signed day one were to reverse previous policies. Not all of those 12 reversals were immigration related. I think only 9 of the 12. But it created and accelerated the crisis. And I think that's what I'm getting to with this.
Yeah. By the way, did you celebrate National Transgender Day of Visibility yesterday?
I celebrated the rise of my risen Savior, Jesus Christ, yesterday. I had nothing to do with Transgender Day.
In my secular worldview, I enjoyed a delicious spiral ham in celebration of some religious holiday that I think that's fine, that's cool. But the idea of putting that on Easter, I mean, come on.
That's disgusting. It really is. We're a nation founded by Christians, whether that's your opinion or not. It's true. The founders were.
No way of getting around it.
Yeah, there's no way of getting around it. They were white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. I'm so sorry.
What's it say on your money?
Exactly. God, we trust.
Every courtroom you've ever been in. What's it say on the wall?
Well, let's take it a step further, Dr. Fuller. Recently, I think it was on MSNBC, and there was some talking head saying the problem. What the problem with Christian nationalists is, Dr. Fuller, is that they seem to think that the rights are granted to them by God and not by the government. And nobody stomped on her. Like, what?
Back to the civics. Back to civics class. Back to civics. Rights are granted to you by the government. Huh. So from her perspective, I guess that's because the government has a monopoly on violence and they can grant or disapprove any right they want to. Interesting perspective. Last time that shooting started.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. It's like Will Parker says, I have a sincere desire to personally teach civics in school, as do I. Alan Kelly says, our educational system and family units at the time in our lifetime are lacking in patriotism, civics, and morality. So the border crisis, we kind of beat that up. I think it has, once again, these long-term ripple effects when you have millions and millions of, and Biden, you know what, man, that's another thing. I hate to get on the soapbox. We have a young girl killed. She did nothing wrong. She was going to college. She had a whole life ahead of her. She had a family that she was going to have. Her father was going to get her to walk her down the aisle. All the beautiful things that a life in our society is going to bring to her and her family, taken from her by a murderous illegal immigrant. And when asked about it, all the 46th sitting president can say is not illegal. He's undocumented. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is a murdering piece of shit.
He also said something about it in the State of the Union, right? He said something to the effect of, well, how many people are being killed by people who are here legally? I'm like, you're really missing the point here, Joe.
Yeah, exactly.
You just really are. You're not addressing the point. But again, why you can't address the point because you have no leg to stand on. So you gotta control the narrative.
Yeah, thank you so much to the 18 folks watching us live. Please like and hit that share button. William says our public elementary school still starts the day with the Pledge of Allegiance. Rule of merit is still trying to hang on. Man, you're absolutely true. A lot of these things that we are talking about this morning, I don't necessarily see here in this little rural enclave here in the South. However, we're part of the flyover states, guys. I mean, if elections were left to populations and not to the Electoral College, we would be immediately swamped by these ridiculous ideas.
Yeah. But, every now and then I see things that give me hope. Correct. My son, we have a little field across the street in our development from our house, and the kids will get over there and they'll play soccer. The third graders, fourth graders, second graders, and they'll have a pickup soccer game. And probably 70% of my neighborhood is ethnic subcontinent Indian. Right? It's just the way it's worked out. And so, 3/4 of the kids that are out there playing soccer with my son are Indian kids. And they will always, as soon as they get enough kids together and they decide they're going to play, somebody says, oh, wait, we got to say the Pledge of Allegiance. And they all stop. They'll all stand together. They put their hands over their hearts and they all say the Pledge of Allegiance. There's no grown up over there telling them to do it. There's no adult beating them over the head, saying, look, you got to face towards Mecca or face towards this place or that place. If somebody's got a flag out, usually me, they'll face the flag and they'll say this Pledge of Allegiance. So then you're just like, oh, maybe I didn't screw this up.
Amen. Yeah, I love it.
But it's all the kids. So every now and then, it's this flash of hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need to fan the flames of those flashes of hope. President Biden's continued battle for the soul of the nation. The 46th president in September of 2022, he gave a speech at Independence Hall where he wants American people to know that he's fighting for the soul of this country by pointing out that 79 million Americans are extreme MAGA Republicans. And to quote Hillary Clinton, they may need formal deprogramming, et cetera. And I think it really put a lot of America on notice, me included, that because I don't consider myself extreme a MAGA Republican or whatever the hell that means. I'm more libertarian myself. But I think it put us on notice that our political affiliation could put us on the radar for the government.
Yeah. Well, we've got a duopoly, right? That's who runs our country. It's the Democrats and the Republicans. So you have a libertarian perspective. I tend to self-define that way as well. Well, what realistic choice do you have? You're kind of forced into one of those two camps. It's like being a Russian peasant in the Russian Revolution. You pick the whites or the reds, buddy, and you're going to get shot if you don't.
Yeah, exactly.
So yes, you may have a libertarian perspective, but you're really limited in how you can have any political voice in this country. And every time somebody tries to start a third party, it gets just crushed by the combined weight of the ruling duopoly. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to force me to pick, then I have to pick one that's the least odorous, right? I mean, in my case, I look at both parties and I say, okay, neither one of them says to me, this is my guy. This is the way I want to go. You're my leader. I'm following you. For me, it's always like, well, which is the lesser of the two evils?
Correct.
Right? I mean, which one on the key issues to me is closer aligned to the way I'd like to see things go than the other? And I think a lot of people are going into our voting booths over the last 8-12 years holding their nose and saying, look, I've got to bite into this shit sandwich. Which side am I going to bite into? And it really, in my mind, became obvious in the Clinton-Trump race. Because I'm like, this is the best we can do? I mean, honestly? And I had a really good friend whose wife was, she took to her bed and was very distraught when Hillary lost because she just felt as though her gender was never going to get into a leadership position in this country. She was very upset about that. And my perspective was, look, I have no problem with a female being in charge. I've been married a long time. Okay.
Well, you have two daughters. I have two daughters.
Right.
I cannot wait for that.
Yeah. But that being said, we got to do better.
Correct.
I mean, are you honestly going to tell me that the best candidate for vice president you could come up with was our currently sitting vice president? I mean, how embarrassing is that to have her as your first?
170 million females in America, and this is it?
My eldest daughter has zero desire to be in politics, and she would make a better vice president.
I could go to Walmart at 2 a.m. and find a better female candidate. I'm just saying.
And so I'm like, had Condoleezza Rice ever run, I'd have voted for her in a shot.
A heartbeat.
In a shot. Because you can find competent women. Here's a shock. Both parties. Pay attention. You don't have to go get some barely coherent governor from Alaska and run her. Okay. You don't have to get some woman who, rumor has it, slept her way all the way up the political chain in California to become the vice president of the United States, and then who you keep the media away from after that because she's such a dingbat. Right. You can do better. I know you can do better. I'm married to someone who's better. You're married to someone who's better.
Correct.
If we can do that much better that easily, why don't we?
All right.
Why don't we? I have no idea.
I don't know. Don says, I'm independent libertarian-ish as well as a retired Army officer and student of history. The words party member have a very negative connotation. Yes, sir, they do. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
Look at the Rwanda genocide. Let me see your card. If it's got the wrong word on there, you're getting killed. So
look at the end of Mao's revolution.
Oh my
You
God.
know, you know, that
60
was
million killed in the Great
right,
Leap Forward.
unbelievable. And now I look at that and I go, you know what? I think I've got an idea for a book. You know, I
Yeah,
really do. Stand by, people.
right. Hamas attacks Israel, prompting. This is another thing. We got a war in the Middle East right now. Seems to be somewhat limited in scope. Of course, there's some proxy agents, whether there's the Houthis or Hezbollah or some of these other things that are rattling sabers. It's limited right now, but it has the potentiality to really go some dark places. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, come on. I mean, as you know, I used to live in the Sinai Desert. I spent a lot of time in Israel. um, I understand where they're coming from. I absolutely do. And when I went over there, I had a very very high opinion of the Israelis and a very very low opinion of uh, their Islamic opponents.
Palestinians
Yeah, Palestinians and
or do you
just
want to have the broader?
probably the broader, because every
Okay.
time I got into that neck of the woods, somebody from that particular religion took a shot at me and tried to kill me. So you know, you tend to take that personally after a while, as you well know. Uh, and what I saw was, you know, some fairly significant racism. I mean, the Israelis have a very very stringent approach to their Palestinian and their Arab neighbors. Um, I understand it intellectually. I'd like to see, you know, it'd be nice if we could move past it, but I understand where they're coming from. In this particular case with this invasion, I get it. They've just had it, and we've talked about this on the show before. They've just had enough. They've had enough of their people being killed, and this was an extreme example. And we've talked about the numbers before, and this dwarfs 9/11's impact in terms of losses on that initial day for the Israelis as a percentage of their society.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't like it was only an explosion killing people at their desks, right? This was murder, this was rape, this was kidnapping, this was all of the horrendous things that warfare brings in a single day. And the Palestinians, they have a playbook, and the playbook was, okay, we do an attack, the Israelis hit us back, and then we say we're sorry, and then we go on and we move on. And they rattle their sabers, they make political hay, we make political hay, everything's great. But the Israelis have had it. They just said enough. We're not putting up with this. People cannot stop, so we're going to stop you. And this is what war looks like. I mean, people get upset about this thing. You know, oh, this is terrible. It's terrible. Yeah, it's terrible. It shouldn't happen. Those of us who've been in wars don't think you ought to use them, you know, because they are freaking horrendous, especially when you have this much of a civilian entanglement. But
Yeah,
understand who made the decision to start this and who is hiding amongst those civilians.
exactly. And again, a lot of this Palestinian blood, to use some perhaps inflammatory language, is on the hands of the Egyptians and the Jordanians and the Syrians, because they could have opened the Rafah gate and let out the women and children and saved some lives. And instead, they don't want them either.
Yeah.
For many obvious freaking reasons that we don't want to say the quiet part out loud. But yeah, it's a mess. And I guess my why I wanted to talk to you about it is the spillover implications. And speaking of spillover, it's what's going on with the Houthis. You know, this little rebellious group in Yemen, if you believe the papers, that is funded and encouraged by Iran to do its bidding. And it has been incredibly effective. And this is one of the things that Jack Carr, who wrote the Terminal List and some other things, retired Navy SEAL, he had Peter Zeihan on geopolitical, I don't know what he labels himself as, a demographer, for lack of a better term.
You should get him on.
I tell you, I cringe a lot of the shit that he says, to be quite frank with you. And one of the things Jack Carr was asking about the Houthis, and this is like a couple of weeks ago, and he's like, "Oh, they're nothing. You know, they're nothing." I'm like, "What are you talking about? They shut down the shipping lanes. They're sinking British cargo vessels. They've killed Americans." And he was just so dismissive of them. I'm like, I turned it off.
No, I was saying you should have Jack Carr on the show.
Oh, yeah. We actually have. Yeah. Seeklander interviewed him.
Oh,
he's an American Warrior Society member, by the way.
Well, all the best looking people are.
Agreed. So, of course, that's not his real name. That's his nom de plume.
Sure.
You and I use our real nom de plumes, although you didn't with your first book, which is
that's true for similar reasons.
Yeah, so Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria, including those responsible for the January 28th drone attack in Jordan that killed 3 Americans. But it's important to note that after we hit them pretty hard, 85 different targets in Syria and Iraq, they've been pretty damn quiet when it comes to especially killing Americans. So maybe that will continue. Maybe it won't.
Yeah, you like to hope, but again, when taken as an individual set of actions, it's one thing. When you put it in the context of kind of what's going on the rest of the world, it takes up heightened import in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
We're already having economic problems in a lot of the major countries in the world. It's not just the U.S. that's having these issues, right? We have our economic problems. China has its economic problems that you and Will have discussed at great length. Mm-hmm. Russia has its economic problems. Right? Europe is having theirs. This just adds to it. This adds uncertainty. It adds instability, and that's never a good thing for business, right? It's bad business. War is good business, but instability and chaos tends to be bad for, at least in the short term. And these guys are adding to it.
Yes, Dr. Fuller, absolutely, man. Which I like Will Parker's comment here. He says, war is supposed to be absolute hell to give leaders pause to send their national treasure for whatever purpose. Lee's famous quote from Marie's Heights, looking over the Battle of Fredericksburg, or the slaughter of the Union troops at Fredericksburg. For those that don't know, man, I encourage you to take a trip to Fredericksburg and just look out across. Oh, there's a subdivision. Did you? Oh, okay. Yeah. And I'm sure you've been to that battlefield.
I've been to that battlefield many, many times.
Yeah. It was an absolute slaughter. Yeah. An absolute slaughter. And Shelby Foote, the Civil War historian and author, he says, I know of no more braver soldiers than those that tried to attack and take Marie's Heights, those Union soldiers, because it was just a killing field. But that's, he says, General Lee's comment was, it is good that war is hell because men would grow too fond of it. And that was his quote at looking at the carnage there at Fredericksburg. And that's the way it needs to be. Like, we firebombed the hell out of Tokyo and killed probably more people than we did with Hiroshima, at least Hiroshima.
There's no probably about it. We did. There were more people killed in those firebombs.
And they were civilians, guys.
And it's not just us, obviously. It happens all over the world. But this is, in my mind, a problem with having generations of political leaders that have no experience in the uniform. They don't really understand at the genetic level what it's like to send young kids into wars like this. Right. And so they're not as loath to get into them because it's much more of an academic exercise, an intellectual exercise, a numbers game to them than it is to the infantry soldier, the grunt that's out there in the mud and the blood.
And you and I have been there. Don says none of their neighbors wanted the Palestinians because they tend to cause trouble. The last time the Jordanians let a bunch of them in, they started a near civil war in the country, and he ain't wrong.
And that where they are still in various countries, they are still segregated. They have not been, integrated into the Jordanian nation. If you were born a Palestinian in a Palestinian camp, you are not a Jordanian citizen.
And never will be, probably.
You never will be. And we've talked about that a lot as well. Nobody wants them, including their Arab brothers. They're more than happy to use them as a foil to attack the Israelis, but nobody's given a pathway to citizenship. Apparently, fences work.
Yeah, I know. You're right. Tony says, would love your take on the Dolly incident there in Baltimore. And that is coming up. Yeah. Ted says, yep, Jeff, man-caused climate change is the greatest threat. What a load of crap. So China's growing influence in Asia and elsewhere. I won't go into too much of this because we beat the damn drum on this. If you want to pause, you could take a look at the screen that I've put together. If you're listening to the podcast, I apologize. You're not going to see it. I don't want to bang on China too much. They're the biggest bully on the block. They're gaining strength every single day. So please go check us out on YouTube. Come check us out on Facebook. If you want to read the slide, I want to keep moving because I want to get Dr. Fuller's take on what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. A Wall Street Journal investigated that. This is an interesting stat. This came out August of 2023. Wall Street Journal investigation found that Ukrainian amputations in the war came between 20 and 50,000, including both military and civilian. In comparison, during World War I, there were 41,000 British and 67,000 Germans that needed amputation. And I think it's just I think it's because we've gotten better at life saving. We're seeing more people survive amputations, but it's just a grisly stat. I've talked about it before. The fifth leading expenditure in Mississippi in 1865 were on veterans' prosthetics. This is 1865, American Civil War, one state, Mississippi. The fifth thing that they're spending the state's budget on was prosthetics. And this is why war is terrible. Russia has had 355,000 killed and wounded. Ukraine, 44,712 killed. These are confirmed by names on military rolls, guys.
How is that number that lopsided? This whole slide really surprised me.
Yeah.
But those numbers that really blew my mind. I was like, the Russians are not conquering the Ukraine, and they're losing 9 times as many people.
Well, let's go back to that slide because people may not be able to hear it on the podcast, Dr. Fuller. The Russians have lost, killed and wounded 355,000. So if we do Ukrainians killed at 44,712 plus another 120,000 wounded, so about
it's still a 2 to 1.
It's a 2x. Yeah, it's a 2x.
That's crazy. I mean, I get it. The Russians are attacking. The numbers generally, fall to the defenders in terms of, loss ratios. But that's still nuts. I would not have. Look, if you had told me that was what was going to happen when this thing kicked off, I'd have told you you're smoking crack.
100%.
I would have said that the Ukrainians are going to lose in 6 weeks, and the Russians are going to be, they're going to lose comparable numbers, maybe a few less, just by virtue of training and equipment. So clearly, I didn't know what I was talking about, or at least what I was thinking about back then.
Same here. I'll just close with the fact that, and this is one of those things that's been normalized now, Russia invaded into Europe.
Yeah.
I mean, it's normal now, but I remember you and I doing shows in the run up to Russia going in. I'm like, do you think Putin will go in? Is he crazy enough to attack into Europe? I don't know. And here's why I should, and here's why I shouldn't, and here's what they bring to the table. This is what the Ukraine. We had these conversations years and years ago, Dr. Fuller. And yet here we are where it's kind of normalized. Yeah, they're still there. Yeah, it's trench warfare. Yeah, it's gruesome. They're using drones in some really innovative ways at the tactical level. I don't know. And then you have the recent Moscow 137 is the last number I heard dead by this terrorist attack. Now, were they sponsored and encouraged and paid for by ISIS-K, or was this some Ukrainian op? I don't know.
Yeah, but let's suppose that it is what they purported it is. It's just it's like ISIS wasn't in the papers for a while. They decided not enough attention for them, so they decided to go ahead and just pop up and cause problems in Russia. It's a brave new world, I guess.
Right.
But like me, you're a bit of a student of history, and it's interesting to me to read about, as much as I have, about World War II and the battles in the Ukraine, when it was the Nazis versus the Soviets, and how similar they are to the battles that are going on there now.
Exactly.
Tanks, troops, the weather, trenches, small arms fire and artillery is what it's coming down to. And it's the same 80 freaking years later. It's the same war.
It's unbelievable. Well, I mean, even I remember us, we had at Camp Lejeune near the K ranges, there's a giant trench complex where we can train in a trench warfare thing. And I used to remember being a young Marine thinking, how stupid. We're never going to go back to trench warfare. Are you freaking kidding me? Yeah. And boy, was I wrong, Dr. Fuller. My God.
Yeah, you'd think we learned that lesson 100 years ago. But, you dig trenches for a reason.
Yeah, amen.
They work, But
now, will they work against UFOs? Because that's the next thing we're going to talk about that's become normal.
We can only hope.
I mean, this is insane, man. The U.S. shoots down 3 unidentified one cylinder object over Canada. I think that was a similar description to the one that was shot down over Dead Horse Bay in Alaska. So this is, and then of course we shot down a Chinese spy balloon. What did we hit back with China? far as I know, nothing. We wagged our finger at them, says, don't do that again.
And of course they did do that.
And of course they did.
And we can't find the parts. That's amazing, isn't it? We shot it down. We know where we shot it down. We had it on radar. We had people watching it. We shoot it down. Oh, I can't find it. Dude, we found the Titanic.
I know.
Okay, we found it. We found parts of that TWA flight that blew up off in New York City. We find everything.
Yeah.
But we can't find this. No, we can't do it. It
The
landed
FBI
in U.S. territory.
Exactly. The FBI and the NTSB put about 80% of the TWA flight 800 back together again in Long Island in some hangar where it still is, as far as I know.
Pictures of it. Yep.
But John Kirby comes out and tells us, at first it was like, hey, we've shot it down, this silver cylindrical object that's hovering, strangely enough, over Alaska. We shot it down. Don't worry, it's fallen under the ice. We're going to be able to recover it. And then 3 days later comes out and says, couldn't find anything. We've called off the search there, and the Canadians have called off the search in the Yukon. Don't worry.
We're arming the polar bears now. It can't be good. But why would you do that? And of course, what has happened? Oh, we just moved on.
Totally moved on.
The media doesn't care. We got other things. Beyonce's got a new album. Taylor Swift's on concert tour. We got to pay attention to that.
So if you've been under a rock, David Grush came out, and David Grush is a decorated, I'm going to read this off the slide here. So if you're listening to the podcast, David Grush is a decorated combat veteran and former United States Air Force intelligence officer who worked for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the NGA, and the National Reconnaissance Office. From 2019 to 2021, he was a representative of the NRO to the Identified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force. From late 2021 until July 2022, he was the co-lead for the UAP. That's Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. That's the new word instead of UFO. That's the old 70s word. We're getting updated now. At the NGA, and is the representative to the task force. He has assisted in drafting the National Defense Authorization Act of 2023. I say all this to say the guy's not a scrub. He presents to the Department of Defense and other three-letter agencies pre-publication review process. I want to go on record. I want to tell the American public thus. They redact some things and say, yeah, you can say the following. He comes out and makes a claim that the United States government maintains a highly secretive UFO retrieval program and possesses multiple spacecraft of non-human origin, as well as corpses of deceased pilots. And again, America kind of snooze fest on it. There have been congressional hearings on this in which he said, I cannot tell you this outside of a skiff. Take me to a skiff and I'll tell you. So now Congress goes to the Department of Defense, says, give us a skiff. And of course they went, yeah, we're working on that. So finally these congressmen that are on the task force, they got to go on a skiff. David Grush provided them with the raw intelligence, and they came out and were kind of shaken. And if you haven't watched those congressmen given their immediate feedback as they walk out of the skiff, it is worthy of your time.
That's interesting that they hit up the DOD for a skiff, because there are skiffs at Congress. I mean, the House has a skiff and the Senate has a skiff. I know because I've been in both of those rooms. Yes. So they exist. But at the same time, they have to be certified by the CIA. And sometimes the CIA is less than diligent about recertifying them. I think that's mostly because they're like, screw you, Congress. We're not coming up there. You pissed us off, so you're at the back of the line. But they have their own buildings. So for them to have to go to DOD that's interesting.
Yeah, I thought so too. It didn't make much sense that, and again, because you were a congressional liaison when you were with the FBI. Am I correct?
You are correct.
Okay.
Finding the one in the Senate is a bitch, by the way. If you're curious.
So I just throw that out there because never before has NORAD scrambled fighters that actually shot down something over American territory. This is a first and a huge step. And again, it happened over the course of February the 10th to the 12th. It was one weekend I remember because I was in New Mexico, and Seeklander and I were like, what the hell? And I'm looking at the sky. Yeah, like, here we go. But anyway, I just bring that up as just one more insane thing that's happening. Let's talk about another insane thing.
To your point, though, real quick.
Yeah, please.
It is the first. It is worthwhile. I mean, jets went into combat. They shot something down. Right. All the more reason to go find it. 3 days? Really? You spend 3 days looking for it, then you quit? You spent weeks looking for Jack Kennedy's son when his plane went down off of the coast years ago. Remember, they sent a destroyer out there looking for that thing, right?
May have been another one of the Clinton family hits, but we'll never know.
I know nothing about the Clintons. I'd like to get that on record now.
Exactly. I didn't commit suicide, by the way.
I am not suicidal. But you spend 3 days looking for something that's that big a deal and then call the whole thing off. That just doesn't pass the smell test. No. It would have been smarter to say, look, we've been out here 6 weeks. We can't find the damn thing. We don't know what happened to it. That would have made sense. 3 days. Nope, can't find it. Got to go. I got a golf time. I got a tea time. I'm out of here. All right. Anyhow, the Dolly Bridge.
Yeah, the Dolly Bridge. My brother just saw it over in New Mexico, and I wasn't going to go into that. I'll send you the photo later, Dr. Fuller, and you can make up your own opinion of what Jeff saw when he was on top of a mountain in New Mexico recently. The Dolly hits the Francis Scott Key Bridge, man. This is a big one, man. On an annual basis, there's about 50 million tons of goods valued at around $80 billion that go to and from that port each year. It ranks as the top 20 in terms of tonnage nationally. It's actually within the top 10 in terms of overall value. 35,000 vehicles on average a day, 12 million vehicles a year use that bridge. My question is, was it a cyber attack? And just to be clear about why I'm making this claim that it could be is because I've said it a million times on the show. It's worthy repeating. If this is your first time listening to the American Warrior Show, please like and hit that share button. But seriously, my son is a cybersecurity research scientist for a large national laboratory. And when he was in his grad program and he was working with a laboratory, him and one of his partners, they wrote a algorithm and a set of code that made cars hackable. And when I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, every single car is completely hackable. I can make your Ford F-150 dad do whatever the hell I want it to do. And I'm like, whoa. And so, and of course,
you're grounded.
Yeah, exactly. Don't you dare, young man.
That's right. Get yourself on airbags.
The Chinese government sent some people trying to get that algorithm. And of course, he lectured at MIT. I've mentioned that before. I'm a proud pop. Let me crow for a minute. But yeah, so he's like, well, these protocols, and he's kind of sketching it out for me on how they receive information is like this, and this is how the attack vectors are such. And so if we can hack up my F-150, you don't think they can hack a cargo ship and make it do whatever the hell they want it to do?
Yeah, it's certainly feasible. This is why we have investigations, right? Let's figure this out.
But it speaks to, what is a cyber Pearl Harbor, World Trade Center? What does it even look like? And what is our response?
Yeah, well, I don't know that we have a response. I think our response is we revert to 1960s technology because we're not going to have a choice. I think that should there come a shooting war with the Chinese, that's going to be the first thing that happens. If they start shooting first, I think our cyber systems are going to get hammered and hard, and things like this will be commonplace. I mean, I don't know if that bridge has completely blocked the port at this point, but it certainly blocked it for some time, right? It's certainly blocked for some time. And what has that done to the traffic patterns, right?
Oh my God.
I used to live up in that neck of the woods and the traffic was already horrendous. But now you wipe out that bridge, and I've been over that bridge, I don't know how many times, back and forth over that thing. And now it's gone. Well, all that traffic didn't just stop. It went a different direction now.
Yeah.
So that's all going to get pushed somewhere else. And if you're a targeting kind of guy, if you can, I mean, what do you do with obstacle plans as an infantry guy? You set it up so that you stop people from going places you don't want them to go and force them to go places you do want them to go, right? That's what I used to do. And you create kill sacks, right?
Yeah.
So if I decide to launch a cyber Pearl Harbor, maybe I don't cut all of your roads. I cut most of your roads, and I force you into places where I can then create a physical attack. So I think the bigger question here, though, is this a possibility? Did this happen? Is it certainly worth looking into? Yes. Is it a cyber attack? Well, maybe it is exactly what it sounds. They say it is. It was a fire, and this happened. But we live in that world now where we ask the questions, where we're wondering, is that the truth? Are we being told the truth? Is this really what happened, or is there something else that's going on here that you're not telling me about? And that speaks to me to a fundamental weakening of the fabric of our society, because we just don't trust our institutions as much
Correct.
as we used to. So when things like this happen, 20 years ago, you asked that question, you sound like, Will Wood with his tinfoil hat. You sound like a conspiracy nut. Now you ask that question, and it's worthy of a reasoned and well thought out response, because that's the world we live in now. And I think that's going to be an increasing problem going forward, is whenever things like this happen now, there's going to be significant segments of our society that are going to ask the questions. And there's going to be people that come up with, plausible answers that may shape opinion in the direction that they want it to go politically. And that's a potential real problem.
Yeah. So far this morning, we've presented the facts. I'm about to put my tinfoil hat on, so I just want to be clear. If you're listening, I'm putting it on right now, metaphorically. A couple of months ago, a very similar thing happened with a Chinese cargo vessel slammed, and you can watch the video of it. It's a clear day, blue skies, and the ship just diverts and slams right into one of the pillars holding up the bridge in China. And of course this place where I saw this, it's like, well, it just shows that maritime safety isn't what it needs. I'm like, wait a minute, this should just
back up.
There's 4 different systems, as I understand it, on these. And my brother, I should ask him. Jeff has his captain's license for 100-ton vessels or whatever, and so maybe he can better answer these questions. But the levels of redundancy are such that this should never, ever, ever happen. And yet, to see this Chinese one just slam right into it, and then one here, I'm like, is this a tit for tat cyber retaliation? You know what I mean? Just, we can reach you too there, America. Easy what you're doing, trying to hurt our economy.
It's certainly a question. And again, in our current sort of social setup that we're in, it's a question that's going to be asked, and someone's going to come out and say, it was, and it is, and you should do this because of this. And it's going to be used by people to influence public opinion and public action.
Well, and to your point, that's how, and I don't think this is classified at all. This was the task that was given to my son's group, and I won't say that there's a code for the protocols that control fighter jets and tanks and all the other things, the cyber protocol, and to make it, hack proof. And that's where it led them into the things that they did. And then my son went, well, there's just a logical leap to go. We're securing Raptors and F-35 Lightnings and Abrams tanks. Maybe there's an application for this for the consumer market as well. And there is. But I say that, this is something that is completely doable. I mean, it's not doable by Rich and TC, but there are people out there that could do it from their mom's basement, I'm sure.
Yeah, and let alone nation-state actors.
100%.
I mean, how valuable is it to the Chinese, for example, if a shooting war starts, and they can make all of our shipping go haywire, all of our civilian aircraft go haywire, and all of our cars shut down that have been built in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Will it, completely stop us from doing anything? No. Will it have a catastrophic impact and a cascading effect throughout our society? Yeah. Yes. Will some of our national attention have to be diverted from the war zone to securing the civilian population because of that? Yeah. So if I'm a Chinese war planner, I can see how dependent Americans are on their electronics. That would be a very viable attacking point for me. That'd be a huge pressure point for me.
And if you can't infiltrate America with Huawei, the number one cell phone provider in the world, although they're illegal here for a freaking reason, and we're trying to ban TikTok, and it's like, okay, you don't want that? Guess what else I can do?
Right.
So
multi-pronged attacks, right?
Yes, sir. That is right. So let's talk about the next one. I know that we're bumping up on our time here, Dr. Fuller. Military recruitment crisis, man. This has been going on for at least the last 4 years. And all we're doing is restating, just a reminder, we're restating the things that have been going on in the last 4 years. They're happening so fast. They're becoming so normalized. The media is jumping on to the next new thing. We need to pause for a minute and look at the suite of issues we got. This one is interesting. Pew Research Center poll found that over half of adults under the age of 30 have a negative view of the United States military, spelling trouble for already low recruitment. Now, this is This was the one institute, the one social institute, the one piece of American government that had, I think Congress rating approval rating is like 12% or less. But the military, say that again.
Generally speaking, they run in the 10 to 15% approval rating.
Exactly. So, but the military has a pretty high approval rating, but then you see things like the botched withdrawal and some of the other things that's going on, within the military. I won't go into, but it's hurting them. And last fiscal year, the military service collectively missed its recruiting goal by roughly 41,000. That's divisions, guys. Divisions.
Several divisions. Yeah.
Several divisions.
A corps, if you will.
Yeah. So, and again, the cohort of Americans, we call them CNIPs, civilian non-institutionalized personnel in the recruiting world. Or
non-institutionalized. That's an important caveat. Yeah.
We used to call them QMA, qualified military available. That was the 17 to 24-year-old military age male population that we can recruit from. Now they call them CNIPs. But anyway, only 23% of them they meet the minimum physical and academic standards to join without a waiver. So we're pulling from a small cohort already. We've got the smallest force we've ever had since, I think, 1940, prior to World War II. We're in trouble, guys. This is big.
And, I guess that new movie is out. It's finally hit the streets, Civil War movie.
It comes out next month.
Next month, okay.
April. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm starting to see reviews on it. That's why I thought it might be out already. And, people are rightly interested. I'm interested in seeing the movie. But it occurs to me that it would be pretty easy to take that and swap out one side of Americans and swap in the invading force from China. Pretty easily. Sir. Just to get an idea of what a modern war in American streets would look like. So, I understand why there are significant barriers to people joining the military. But as you and I well know, I'd much rather fight them in a desert on the other side of the planet than I would want to fight them on Potato Farm Road.
Amen. Yeah.
In Crossville, Tennessee. I'd much rather fight them out in some nameless, faceless desert than downtown Charlotte. And if you don't think that's a realistic possibility, maybe not a probability, but certainly a possibility, then you're not paying attention to Russia and the Ukraine.
Well, and let's back up because, again, Americans are really, really, they have a historical amnesia about a lot of things. My grandfather, my mother's father, fought the Japanese in hand-to-hand combat in Alaska on the Aleutian Islands. People forget, Alaska was a territory at the time. It wasn't a state, so you could say much ado about nothing. But my God, man, they're and you could also say, well, were they just trying to draw us up there, and they really didn't want to, hold ground, and it was just a feint maneuver? I don't know. It doesn't matter. I mean, we fought.
Dead is dead, right?
Dead is freaking dead. So I say that, and I also say there's an interesting at the balcony on the White House. There's one little black spot. Are you familiar with this black spot I'm talking about?
No, I am not.
There's a black spot that they left from
after
where
they burned it.
Exactly, when the Brits burned it in 1813, I think it was. And President, who was it at the time? Madison had to run for his life and left the meal that he was eating with his family right there in the White House. And the Brits came in and finished up the meal, and then they set
congressional leaders were running through the woods. Yeah,
and they set the Capitol on fire. So this has happened. Civil war has happened. Our nation has been attacked by ground forces. So don't think it can't happen, guys. Like I've said before, because you got a cell phone in your pocket.
Yeah, and I recognize the severe barriers to invasion that the Pacific Ocean has for a nation like China to project power that far, but it's not the barrier it was 80 years ago.
Yes,
it's just not. And the Chinese Navy is not the Chinese Navy of 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So again, is it probable as we sit here today? Not probable. Is it possible? Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's absolutely possible. So we don't want that. So to the extent we can recruit our soldiers and train them and get them ready to go, I think we need to, because let's face it, you didn't lose your skill set just because you got to be in your mid-50s, Rich.
Right.
You still know how to do these things. Maybe you're not going to hump a ruck 25 miles and then fight at the end of that ruck march anymore.
I wish, but no.
Right. So having those people trained and experienced is a national benefit. Plus, it'll be nice to have them around in the camps when we're all being re-educated.
I want to skip back to something when we were talking about, let's see here, pull it back up, Dr. Fuller. The dolly hitting the Francis Scott Key Bridge. If you haven't watched the Barack and Michelle Obama movie, Leave the World Behind, they're the producers of it. And I think that speaks to I could put a tinfoil hat on with that. But it's about some sort of bizarre cyber attack, and you have cargo ships just running aground. And so again, was that some sort of harbinger for where we are now? I got my tinfoil hat on, guys. You do you. I'm just saying.
Odd coincidence, I'll give you that.
It is. We're almost done here, guys. So thank you for bearing with me, Dr. Fuller. And if you got to go, just wave your flag and we'll
catch us later. We'll be here.
45th president of the United States, 91 indictments, although that's been pared down to, I think, 80 something, 4 different jurisdictions, 2 impeachments, the talk of seizing this man's assets, multiple states attempting to remove the ballot. Of course, SCOTUS weighed in and stopped that. But again, this idea of lawfare against one person or political affiliation is something that has become normalized to a degree. I mean, it was one of those few Trivial Pursuit questions before the 90s that I could get right all the time. What president has been impeached? Andrew Johnson. Yay, Richie, you're paying attention in class. One guy. Now we've had Bill Clinton, and now the 45th president twice. My God, man.
Well, and if you don't think that Biden would have been impeached at this point if the Senate was Republican, you're smoking crack.
Correct.
I think they'd have gone. The House was ready to go after him and has already made it very clear that they'd love to go after him. So now impeachments are normalized, and not passing a budget, that's normalized.
Yep.
When was the last time they actually passed a budget? I can't even remember.
No. 30
years ago, 40 years ago, and it becomes an issue, political football, every cycle. Every 2 years, it seems like we're having a battle over it.
We got to avert a shutdown. And
we got to avert a shutdown. Yeah, it's nice to be a retiree because even if they shut down, we still get paid. So
amen. I remember we were talking about a government shutdown, and some of the Marines were like, "Hey, sir, we're going to get paid." And the lieutenant colonel, my boss, is in the office. I'm like, "Hey, sir, how does that work?" He's like, "Show me in your contract where it says you get paid." And he's right. Having been a recruiter for years, I'm like, oh, crap. It ain't in there. None of the enlistment documents you signed to join the military says you will get paid.
Well, the good news in that regard is that every successful civil uprising that, it's been a civil war or a transition of government internally has really gotten it kicked off when they stopped paying the military. The Russians were trying over and over and over again to swap out governments, and it wasn't working. They were trying to get rid of the Tsar. It wasn't working. And then he stopped paying the military. And the military's like, oh, F me? No, F you. Right?
Exactly.
It happened with Napoleon's folks. It happened, over and over and over again. So you like to
follow the Berlin Wall. When the damn gate guards stopped getting paid, they're
right.
Like, I'm out of here.
Right, I'm gone. So if you like to hope that the American government has figured that out, that look, if we do nothing else, we got to pay the guys with the guns.
Mm-hmm.
But the day they stop paying them, that's a problem.
Yeah. So I think this is maybe the last slide here, Dr. Fuller. Thank you for bearing with me, sir.
Of course.
Election integrity and the threat of internal conflict. Among 27 countries in the European Union, 63% ban mail-in voting unless living abroad, and another 22% require photo ID in order to obtain the mail-in ballot. So it's 22% ban the practice, even for those who do live abroad. So I say this because there's a lot of countries out there that have already tried it. They realize they can't control it. It's rife for fraud, and they've chosen not to do it. Every single one bans mail-in voting for those living in the country require a photo ID to obtain mail-in ballots. 63% don't allow it, even for citizens. So the concern about voter fraud with mail-in ballots, I think, is delusional, but it's a delusion that's shared with most of the world. What do you think?
Yeah, and I worry about it. Because at this point, even if it's not happening, people think it is, and that's the same thing as it actually happened. And what happens if a nation-state actor decides to get involved in it? They get a couple of copies of our mail-in ballots, and they reproduce them with nation-state capabilities, and then start hammering us. What happens then? What safeguards do we have in place for that? especially in these local elections that are decided by fairly narrow margins. You know, if all of a sudden 10% of your ballots are fraudulent, that's a problem. You know, that can shift weight. And oh, by the way, if it's found out that 10% of the ballots are fraudulent, well, then what happens? Then people lose faith and trust in the system, and the system falls apart. You've talked about our monetary systems a lot on the show with Will. You talk about fiat currency that works in essence because people believe it works. Well, what happens when that belief vanishes? What happens when I decide that a $100 bill that you hand me isn't worth $100? Well, what happens if the guy that's rolling down Pennsylvania Avenue to take over the presidency on January 20th, we don't believe he's the president? You know, you get something like January 6th.
On steroids this time.
On steroids, exactly. When people completely lose faith. So again, if I'm a nation state actor looking to cause problems for the United States, maybe I don't necessarily want to invade the United States. I just want to hamstring them. That's a pretty good way to do it.
Yeah.
It's I have nation state assets to put towards the process. So mail-in ballots, like you said, is just rife for potential fraud at a small level, a small scale level. I'm a drug addict. I got a mail-in ballot. I want $20. I sell the ballot to somebody else. He gets my ballot. I get $20. I'm good. It's also possibly a way to undermine the entire electoral process. It's a way to fraudulently elect people. It's a way to erode the trust in the system that is critical to the system functioning. It's just a bad idea. I mean, look,
it is.
Every single time I can vote in South Carolina, if there's an opportunity for me to vote, I vote. We just had a single issue referendum that came up 2 weeks ago. Hey, you got to drive, and I couldn't go to my normal voting place. Had to drive across town. It's like driving across Crossville. It's not that big an issue,
right?
But I do. I vote. I drag my ass down there and I vote because I can, and I have to show my driver's license every single time. And you know what?
Damn it.
And you know what that does to me? It makes me smile. Yeah, great. I say I'm TC Fuller. Here's a government issue ID that says I'm TC Fuller. Is this address correct? Yes, it is. All right, go over there and vote. Thank you. It's not a discriminatory action. It's not, oh, you're making me show an ID. Oh, clearly you're violating my rights. It's crap.
Well, what was that judge, I think in Illinois, that recently said that illegals have a Second Amendment right to possess firearms? It's just an intellectual leap to say, well, if they can have guns in this country and they can vote, right? I mean,
they can be cops and they can have guns.
Where does it stop?
They have powers of arrest. You know what? If we're going to make them local cops, maybe we can make them federal cops and we can put them on the border.
Oof.
It's not like we're enforcing the border laws anyhow. And it'd be so much easier to have Ecuadorians on the border talking to the Ecuadorians that are coming across the border.
Just saying.
Oh my God, it's a win-win.
In
our political party when they come across the line too, that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah. Alan Kelly says, vote. Just look at Virginia. And Tony mentions, the appearance of impropriety. One of the interesting things about in the Marine Corps, fraternization, the Uniform Code of Military Justice statute relative to fraternization is the only statute that just says if there's the appearance of fraternization, you're guilty.
Yeah.
And that's scary. Like, what evidence do I need? It just appears that you're chummy with Sergeant X over there, and you're an officer and you know better.
I had an E7 that had a witness saw him go into a hotel room with one of his E6 subordinates' wives, and that E6 and my XO were waiting outside when they left the next morning.
Oh yeah.
And of course his claim was you can't prove anything, and my claim was I don't have to.
That is correct.
I do not have to. And oh, by the way, I'm going to yank your security clearance too because I don't trust you. You can't do it. Oh, but I can.
Oh, but I can. Watch how fast I do this. Last slide, guys. Dishonorable mention. Of course, what's going on in the last 4 years is Jeffrey Epstein and Pedo Island. Turns out it was real. Alex Jones and all those wacky weirdos out there on the fringe that wear their tinfoil hats and actually have a media presence have been saying for years that these billionaires were meeting on this island. They were raping children, And it was just like, bro, come on. Next, you're going to tell me there's lizard people controlling the government. This is insanity. And yet it was all true, or mostly true, although no one has been held accountable for it. Of course, Jeffrey Epstein decided to suicide himself inside a prison. Don't worry about the fact that the prison guards passed out and the cameras were not working in that pod. That's nothing to see here, folks. We got Giselle Maxwell, locked her ass up, but nobody else has been held to account, man. So that's the last thing I want to close our happy discussion with.
Again, there's a lack of trust in the system, right? So you can't argue that an investigation hasn't been made public. That simply hasn't happened. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is you've got a vacuum of information, and people are going to fill it. And every time we get a little bit more of a tidbit, it seems to fill that void a little more, and it gives fuel to this idea that these things were happening. Was it happening to the egregious level that we hear? I don't know.
I don't either.
But here's the thing: conduct the investigation.
Yes.
Right. And I understand, and you do as well, that look, if I was on that island and you're going to bring my name up as having been on that island, I have a right. I have an interest, if I'm a public figure, in not making that happen, because just by being associated with Epstein and that island, I'm going to be painted as a pedophile. And I'm going to say, look, I'm going to have my lawyer go in and say, look, you're about to trample on my rights in this process. I didn't do anything. To which I reply, let's find out if you did anything. You were there. We can show this happened and this happened. Let's conduct an investigation and find out. And that's not happening. Or if it is happening, we're not hearing about it. And that's a problem.
Oh, I think without question, the DOJ, I mean, if you, I think they released that 6 hard drives perhaps were taken out of Epstein's brownstone. I'm sure there's nothing on there, nothing to see here. Those, each and every room of that house was wired. Was Jeffrey Epstein an intelligence asset for someone, or maybe a conglomeration of someone's? Perhaps. The idea of the honeypot has been around probably as old as time.
Or was he just padding his own pockets? Was he collecting favors? Was he collecting? Look, if I've got a video of a very famous person, say, I don't know, somebody in the royal
Prince
family.
Andrews.
Oh, I wasn't going to say that, but let's go. Since you brought him up, does it behoove me to have a hammer? Look, I've done you a favor. Here's the carrot. I got you somebody in your preferred, target audience. So that's the carrot. And I've also got a stick because I've got a video of you with that person. Uh-huh. So now I'm going to call you for a favor. I'm going to call you for investment advice. I'm going to call you for whatever. Are you inclined to tell me to pound sand? I don't know. And if I'm doing that over and over and over again, and I'm not doing it with, the guy that picks up my trash and the guy that, mows my lawn, I'm doing it with the movers and shakers of our society. That has value, even if I'm not giving it to the North Koreans, mm-hmm. Even if I'm not acting in their interests.
Well, nobody can find out how he became a multi-billionaire. No one.
And yet,
that speaks volumes.
Yeah.
This idea that you let somebody get some dirt on you and that's used as leverage. I mean, that's blackmail. That's actually a Scottish word. We're really good at that. But we have to guard against that. And I say that because it can happen in the smallest ways. We at the police academy and the FBI academy, they talk about ethics in law enforcement. We had a chancellor come in and gave us a really good ethics class. And, he really is like, don't even take a free cup of coffee from a convenience store. That's how it starts. I'm like, and he has a point there. I mean, when I was a staff sergeant, I had a gunnery sergeant in a position of power over me who's like, look, I'm going to let this slide. This thing, one of my guys screwed up. I'm not going to report this to command, but you're going to have he called it a naked picture on me, and I'm going to have one on you because you're going to let it slide. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, that's not going to happen, brother.
No.
Here's what's not going to happen, gunnery sergeant. I ain't doing it. Mm-hmm. We're going to call the CO. We're going to run this shit up the flagpole, and we'll let the chips fall where they may. And he couldn't believe that I was doing that. I'm like, this is not how I do business. Well, the interesting thing about that is I became an officer. He got orders out of there over this situation. And guess what? When I became an officer, he worked for me. So my point of saying that is if I would have had allowed that, he would have had leverage on me later, years later, as a commissioned officer. Like, hey, sir, remember that time?
Or even if he didn't actually have the leverage, he knows something about your character.
Exactly.
He knows where that chink is in your armor. He knows if it happened before, I can do it again. And look, as a guy who's worked counterintelligence cases, a guy who's developed sources in sticky situations, I'm telling you, that is exactly how it starts. Mm-hmm. So the fact that you've got what appears to be a massive wall around Epstein and what he's done that seems to have suddenly coalesced it shouldn't be really surprising to anybody, because you have people with legitimate interest in their own privacy, as well as people that probably have legitimate interest in concealing their criminal activity or the criminal activity of their friends. And these are not the Rich Browns and the T.C. Fullers of the world, right? These are the the heirs to the throne of England.
Yeah.
I mean, these are people with serious stroke. So, and they can afford the best lawyers, and he was shocked. But again, conduct the investigation without passion or prejudice, and let the chips fall where they may. It's the only way to keep faith in the system. And faith in the system is the one thing, the string that I see through all of the stories that we've talked about today. It's eroding. And when we lose faith in that system, we're going to have big problems, because our systems run on faith. They run on trust. And if we don't trust within our society, our societal bonds break down. And nothing good comes from the United States having fragmented into a balkanized set of nations.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned it earlier, Dr. Fuller, in terms of faith for the government, but fiat currency, man, that flies on the Tinkerbell effect. It only believe it has value because it has value. You mentioned earlier, that $100 bill I give you has value only because we think it has. But once the faith in all this, and what did Nixon say? It's the full faith and credit of the United States government. Well, when that faith is gone, then guess what? Your fiat currency is outhouse paper. I mean, it's worthless.
It all collapses. But I mean, you can say the same thing about gold and silver. They have no intrinsic value beyond what we place on it. They're pretty. 22 caliber bullets, on the other hand, might have an intrinsic value.
Yes, sir.
So,
a carton of eggs to feed your children,
that's why barter systems work so well.
Correct. Dr. Fuller, I've kept you on here way past the time that I was allotted to have you this morning. I apologize, but I really appreciate you.
I've got to take this manuscript of the next book. It's all printed out, ready to rock, and do some editing on it today. And that's pretty much my big thing. That, and the kids are on spring break, so I'm going to hang out with them today.
Well, enjoy your time, sir. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody that watched. Thank you, everybody that listened. Please, if you've enjoyed this content, please give it a share, give us a like, give us comments on iTunes or reviews. Anything would greatly appreciate it. Go check out AmericanWarriorShow.com. Pick up one of Dr. Fuller's books, or give your patronage to some of our amazing sponsors like Works Holsters, Precision Holsters, Appalachian Standard. We got some great sponsors. Check them out over there. They got discount codes for you. Dr. Fuller, if you would, sir, take us out.
Fight is coming, folks. Be ready.